All right. Hello, everybody. Again, this is podcast episode number 2. This is, believe it or not, my third time recording this because different reasons. Um, the goal of this particular episode is to talk about language and how language is being used these days and has been used for a long time to influence people's minds almost on a subconscious level. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of expressions being introduced in our vocabulary today, um, which have almost like a secret, not secret. If you look at it, you can figure it out, but um, there is a meaning behind it that people don't realize it. And then they start using it in everyday language, it becomes normal, and it's to our own detriment. Um, Language is basically a very powerful weapon that is being used to influence our thoughts subversively. Just to give you an example, the term post traumatic stress disorder was something that developed over time. It was initially called shell shock. If you ever watched George Carlin talk about that, he explained the evolution of this term from shell shock, which was very simple and everybody understands what that means. It relates to the type of psychological condition soldiers experienced in World War One, and now it has evolved to post-traumatic stress disorder, which is basically a version of the same concept, which is much more palatable to the ear, easier to deal with, and because of that, it's accepted as a norm more easily by the population. And if you notice, these days you can be shell shocked by things that are not even close to war. You can be you can have post traumatic stress disorder if somebody didn't use the right pronouns with you. That whole pronouns thing again, it's I'm not going to get into that right now, but it does relate to language. That's another way of subconsciously influencing our thoughts and what we consider normal. In my opinion, though, it won't succeed because it's just becoming extremely ridiculous right now. Anyway, um, so language is definitely being used as a weapon in psychological operations done on the people. The reason why psychological operations are done on the people, are performed on the people, is because, as I mentioned in episode number 1, there is a group of very powerful people, what I call the Illuminati, deep state, whatever you want to call it, whose goal is to basically enslave humanity and create a one world government. And they use, instead of war, which was used in the past. By the way, the Illuminati is an old group. Um, I'm not gonna go into the history of that, but it's not something new. So the goal is a one world government, and one of the more powerful weapons that they use is language. I'll give you an example. Post traumatic stress disorder, this expression used to be called shell shock in the First World War. George Carlin talks about this in one of his specials. George Carlin is a very famous comedian. If you haven't heard of him, check him out. He is very intelligent and makes some very interesting points. So the shell shock used to be a term used for the condition that soldiers would acquire after war. After you experience the atrocities and death and the hell that is war, you develop a condition that gives you nightmares at night, whatever it is. I'm not very familiar exactly from a psychological point of view with everything that's involved, but I think you guys get a good idea, a decent idea of what I mean by it. Now, that same term is called, now, that same condition rather, is called post traumatic stress disorder. It's a more palatable term, it's something that is easier for people to stomach. However, it really refers to the same thing. But because it sounds so much better than shell shock, now people are using it for almost anything. It's used to diagnose, doctors use it to diagnose people. You can have post traumatic stress disorder from somebody not using the right pronoun on you or something like that. It's getting ridiculous. Uh, a few examples besides post traumatic stress disorder that I came up with that I see used all the time. Racism is one of them. Now, first of all, racism comes from the word race. Race is not something that's easily identifiable in terms of definition. What's the definition of race? How do you quantify one race versus another? So that's already a problem. But to use the word racism when somebody discriminates against you or does something bad towards you um, is wrong, in my opinion. It's misguided and it only creates division between us. I'll give you an example. Let's take another term instead of racism. Let's say that there's a group of people out there who don't like blonde hair on others and they discriminate against them. This is all hypothetical. Now, if they discriminate against somebody with blonde hair, would you call that blondism? Or would you call that person a blondist? Sounds kind of ridiculous, right? It's because it is ridiculous. Let's say somebody doesn't like big noses or long nose, big nose, whatever. Would you call that person a nosist if they discriminate you, if you have a big nose? Would you call that person or that act nosism? I mean, this stuff is ridiculous. See, but when you think about it like that, it seems ridiculous. But we're so used to racism that we just use the term without even thinking about it. Racism is a term that's relatively new. It really was first started really becoming popular in the 1960s around the civil rights movement. And it really was, in my opinion, created to divide us. You don't really know when somebody mistreats you, you don't really know why they did it. There are so many reasons other than racism. It could be they just had a bad day that day, and anybody they encounter, they're gonna behave inappropriately towards them. It could be even a family member. You could misbehave around a family member, and if you had a bad day. So just because somebody does something to you that you don't like, it doesn't mean that it's because of the color of your skin or etc. It just means that that person did something evil, in my opinion. It's always right versus wrong, good versus evil. Let's stop using these terms like racism or feminism or anti Semitism, all these things that basically just create divisions between us. Why don't we take responsibilities for our own actions? If you do something that somebody else finds rude, then it's up to you to look inside to see why you're doing that. I wouldn't necessarily I wouldn't consider myself a racist just because I did something bad towards somebody with black skin, for example. It's kind of ridiculous. It's deeper. It's easy. It's like an easy scapegoat. Racism. But it's being used, and again, my main point with all of this is that it's being used to divide us. Another one that I started noticing at the beginning of the pandemic is COVID. Remember when the pandemic first started, it was about the coronavirus infecting people. Then, within a very short period of time, it changed to COVID. What's COVID? That's not the name of the virus, right? Why all of a sudden COVID? I don't think the answers are too clear, but I'll just give you a little food for thought on this. COVID could stand for Certificate of Vaccine ID. I think we kind of, if you look at what's going on around us, you can see the connection. Another one is social distancing that really caught on with people. Oh, stay 6 feet apart. Again, division. Distance yourself from others. It's also very psychological. You keep repeating these types of words: distancing, social distancing. You're going to remove yourself from people. You're going to be uh, physically and psychologically. And if you look around, most people, especially young people, are very isolated. They don't have real friends. And this is all, in my opinion, the result of these psychological operations being done on people without their awareness. Another one is Black Lives Matter, the organization, right? I think it was very smart on whoever created this organization to call it Black Lives Matter, because if you have any kind of criticism of this organization, it would be very hard for you to express it to people, because the implication would be that you don't care about black lives. I don't know if you guys are aware, but the initial leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement were, by their own admission, Marxists. Not only that, but their goal, one of their goals that was listed on their website, I remember I looked it up myself, was to dissolve the nuclear family: mother, father, kids. So for some reason that got snuck in there. What's that got to do with black lives, right? So you just have to be aware of these things. My point being that, again, if you have any kind of criticism of Black Lives Matter, you can immediately be called a racist. Again, I went over racist and racism and all of that, so I'm not going to go over it again. One of the ways that psychological operations are carried out on people, and this is researched, is repeating of certain messages, even if you don't agree with them. If you keep hearing it in the media, from your friends, from your family, eventually, if something is repeated enough, it'll become truth in the public conscience. And I'm sure that you would agree that all these terms that I talked about have been repeated in the media ad nauseum. Another one is too big to fail. I got them all written down, people. Another one is too big to fail. I don't know if you remember 2008 financial collapse. They used this term, too big to fail. I guess banks are too big to fail now. So even though they created that mess to begin with, they are too big to fail. So this is an example of just repetition. And eventually, I remember even people, even myself, I used to say, yo, they have their role in this collapse, but they're too big to fail. What are we going to do if they fail? The whole economy is going to dissolve. Now, that may be true, but it doesn't mean that necessarily that was the wrong thing to do at the time, to let them fail. Because from the ashes, something new comes along. Something better, hopefully. Too big to fail. And look at where we are right now. Unbelievable. Trust the science is another one. Trust the science, people. Yeah, of course you have to trust good science. I'm a, I wouldn't say a scientist, but my field of expertise has a lot to do with science. I'm a physical therapist. So I had to take a lot of science courses, learn how to analyze research, etc. So I do know about science. Science, as everybody knows, everyone who is familiar with how science works is always changing. And even in one point in time, when there is an accepted view about a particular topic in science by most scientists, it's never a consensus. There are scientists who have different opinions, different theories. So when you say trust the science, it's almost like anti-scientific to say that, in my opinion, because you have to not trust the science in order to come up with new updated science, if that makes any sense. Another term, and this will be the last one because I'm getting tired, folks. I'm getting tired. Anti-Vaxxer was recently, this term was recently changed in terms of its definition. That its definition got changed. Ugh. Its definition got changed in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Instead of just meaning what it used to mean, people who are against vaccines, now it means also people who are against vaccine mandates. Can you believe that? They just snuck that in there. Makes you wonder, right? Why they do that. It might have something to do with the future and how they're planning to punish people who are against the COVID vaccine in particular. So there you go. This is my 2 cents. I could go on and on with this, but what's the point? I think I made my main point. If you like this, you can comment. You can share this with your friends. And until next time, people, stay strong, stay focused. Let me not finish just yet because this just brought up a new idea in my head. The way to protect yourself from these phrases and these psychological operations is to stay true to a particular moral code, your ethics, right? Don't trust anything unless it makes sense to you. Analyze it, and if it makes sense to you, trust it. Don't just use a term because all your friends are using that term. Make friends with people who share the values that you have, and always stay true to your ethics. And that, I think, is the shield against these types of tactics to undermine our consciousness. Okay, that's it. I want to hear what you have to say about this, if you want to. I know that not a lot of people are watching this podcast right now, but if you feel like it, drop a comment, share this video, and until next time, take care.